My father sold my dead mother's house because his new wife needs a fresh start. Now I am going to take it back. I drove there Sunday to tend to Mom's garden like I did every week and found a sold sign in the yard and strangers moving furniture inside. My key didn't work. I stood there trying it again and again until a man came out asking if I needed help. "This is my house," I said. "We just bought it last month," he said. "Closed 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. My father had sold my mother's house 3 weeks ago and hadn't told me. Mom died 2 years ago from cancer. Left the house to me in her will. Said it clear as day in front of the lawyer. The house goes to Kendall. She'll take care of it. Dad had power of attorney, though. Something about tax purposes, he said. Just until we got the estate sorted. I drove straight to his new condo where he lived with Diane. She answered the door in yoga clothes even though she'd never exercised a day in her life. "Kendall, what a surprise. Your father's golfing. Get him on the phone. Now." She called him, handed me the phone with a little smirk. "What's this about?" he asked, like he didn't know. "You sold Mom's house. My house. It was never your house. I had power of attorney. For tax purposes. You said for tax purposes. Mom left it to me. Your mother wasn't thinking clearly near the end. That house was marital property. She owned it before you married. Her parents left it to her. You never paid a cent toward it. Then, Diane needed us to start fresh. That house had too many memories." "Diane? Diane needed? What about what I needed?" "You're being dramatic. You have your own place. That's not the point. Mom wanted me to have her house. The house she grew up in. The house where her parents lived. Well, it's done now. The money went toward our new condo." "Your new condo? All of it?" "Diane picked a nice place. She deserves nice things after everything she's been through. Everything she's been through. Her husband left her because she was cheating. But sure, she'd been through everything. Their condo was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble counters, the kind of place that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. "This is what you bought with my mother's house?" I asked. Diane shrugged. "We needed appropriate space for our lifestyle." "Your lifestyle? You don't even work." "I manage the household." "What household?" "It's 2 people in a condo." My father walked in then, still in golf clothes, face already red. "This is unnecessary drama, Kendall. You stole from me." "I didn't steal anything. I handled the estate as I saw fit." "As Diane saw fit, you mean? Watch how you talk about my wife." "Your wife who you started dating before Mom was even diagnosed? That wife?" His face went darker. "Your mother and I were having problems. Mom was having problems with you cheating. That's different from having problems." Diane stood up. "I think you should leave. I'm not going anywhere until I get answers." "There's nothing to answer," my father said. "The house is sold. The money is spent. It's done." Those were her memories, her life, my inheritance. "You got your inheritance," he said. "The life insurance. $10,000. The house was worth $400,000. The house was worth what someone would pay for it. Someone did pay for it. $400,000 according to property records." He shifted. Diane looked away. "That's what Mom wanted me to have. What she worked for. What she saved for. What she promised me when she was dying." "Promises from sick people don't count," Diane said. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was clear enough to write a will. "That will wasn't specific enough," my father said. "It left room for interpretation." "What interpretation?" "It said the house goes to Kendall. It said the house goes to you after the estate was settled. I determined it was better to liquidate the asset." "Better for who?" "For everyone. You didn't need that old house. 4 bedrooms for 1 person." "I have 2 kids. Every other weekend," Diane corrected. "That's not a full-time family." "Did you really just say that?" She shrugged. "Facts are facts." I looked at my father. "This is who you chose? This is who you betrayed Mom for?" "Your mother's gone," he said coldly. "Diane's here. I have to think about the living. I'm living. Your grandchildren are living. You're adults. You can take care of yourselves. But Diane can't? That's different. She's my wife. Mom was your wife for 28 years. I'm your daughter forever. Or I was." I stood up. "Where are you going?" "To see a lawyer. You can't contest the sale. I had legal authority." "Maybe. But Mom also had a safety deposit box. Just her name on it. The key was in her jewelry box, the one Diane donated. But I have the spare." His face went white. "What safety deposit box?" I didn't answer. I walked out and drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the spare key Mom had given me years ago. The small brass thing that might be the only proof I had left. Monday morning I was in my car before sunrise. The key in my jacket pocket where I kept touching it to make sure it was still there. The bank opened at 9 and I was parked outside at 8:45, watching the employees unlock the doors and turn on the lights. At 9 exactly, I walked in and went straight to the counter where a woman with reading glasses on a chain asked how she could help. I explained that my mother had passed 2 years ago and I needed to access her safety deposit box. She typed something into her computer and called over a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Cullen, the branch manager. He asked me to follow him to his office, a small room with fake wood paneling and a desk covered in papers. Cullen pulled up the account on his screen and confirmed the box was registered only in my mother's name, with no other people listed. He explained I would need to show him the death certificate and something proving I was her daughter. I told him I had both documents in my car from when I handled her estate paperwork 2 years ago. He nodded and said to bring them in. I practically ran to the parking lot, grabbed the folder from my trunk where I kept all Mom's important papers, and hurried back inside. Cullen reviewed the death certificate and my birth certificate showing my mother's name, made copies of both, and then led me through a heavy door into the vault area. The walls were lined with small metal doors, each with 2 keyholes. He checked his records and walked to box 447, inserted his master key into one lock, and stepped back so I could use Mom's key in the other. My hand shook so badly I missed the keyhole twice before getting it in. The door swung open and Cullen pulled out a long metal box, carried it to a small private room, and left me alone with it. Inside, I found 3 things. A sealed white envelope with my name written across the front in Mom's handwriting, a thick folder held together with a rubber band, a jewelry box I recognized from her dresser, the wooden one with flowers carved into the lid. I picked up the envelope first and tore it open. Mom's letter was 3 pages long, written in the shaky handwriting she had near the end. She wrote that she knew Dad was cheating with Diane and she suspected he would try to take the house after she died. She said she gathered all the proof she could find and put it somewhere safe for me. She told me to fight back if he tried anything, that the house was mine and she wanted me to have it for my kids. She said she was sorry she couldn't stop him while she was alive, but maybe she could help me after the letter ended with her telling me she loved me and to be strong. I had to stop reading twice because the words got blurry. When I opened the folder, the first thing I saw was a copy of the house deed. It showed the property was transferred to my mother alone from her parents 26 years ago, 3 years before she married my father. There were property tax records going back 2 decades with only Mom's name on them, bank statements showing mortgage payments coming from an account with just her name, a letter from her parents' lawyer dated from when they died, confirming the house was their gift to their daughter and her alone, with no claim from any spouse. Mom had documented everything. The next document made my chest feel tight. It was a notarized statement dated 3 months before Mom died. In it, she declared she was of sound mind and wanted to make her wishes clear. The house at the address where she lived was to go to her daughter Kendall upon her death. It was not to be sold. It was not to be given to her husband. It was not to be used to pay any debts. It was Kendall's inheritance. Period. A notary public had signed it along with 2 witnesses I didn't recognize. This wasn't just a will that could be interpreted different ways. This was Mom stating exactly what she wanted in the clearest possible terms. I opened the jewelry box and found 3 rings inside. Mom's wedding ring from her first marriage before Dad, a simple gold band. Her parents' matching wedding bands, worn thin from decades of wear. Under the rings was a folded piece of paper. Mom's note said these rings should go to my children someday as family heirlooms, pieces of their grandmother and great-grandparents to remember where they came from. She wrote that Diane should never touch them. I took out my phone and photographed every page of every document, making sure the images were clear and readable. Then I asked Cullen if the bank could make copies. He said they had a copy machine I could use and led me to it. I copied everything twice, put 1 set in my purse and 1 set in my car, then returned the originals to the metal box. Cullen suggested I might want to add my name to the box access list. Now that I knew about it, I said yes immediately and filled out the paperwork. Back in my car, I searched online for estate lawyers and found someone named Alicia Morris, with good reviews and a website that mentioned helping families with inheritance disputes. I called the number and got her secretary. Explained it was urgent about a property sale that shouldn't have happened. The secretary put me on hold, came back and said Alicia could see me at 2 that afternoon if I could make it. I said I would be there. I had 4 hours to kill, so I drove to a coffee shop and sat there going through the photos on my phone over and over, reading Mom's letter again, looking at the notarized statement. This was real proof. This was evidence Dad had no right to sell that house. At 1:30, I drove to Alicia's office, a small building downtown with her name on a brass plate by the door. The secretary led me to a conference room where Alicia met me, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. I spread all the copied documents across the table and told her everything. How Mom died 2 years ago. How Dad had power of attorney supposedly for tax purposes. How he sold the house 3 weeks ago without telling me. How he spent all $400,000 on a condo with his new wife. How I just found Mom's safety deposit box with all this proof. Alicia put on reading glasses and went through each document slowly, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me and said I had a strong case. The house was clearly Mom's separate property from before the marriage. The notarized statement showed Mom's explicit wishes. Dad's power of attorney was supposed to be used in Mom's best interest, not his own. Selling the house against Mom's stated wishes and keeping all the money could be a violation of his duty. She said the word could very carefully, then explained this wouldn't be simple or fast. Father would argue the power of attorney gave him complete control over estate decisions, and proving he acted in bad faith instead of legitimate management would require showing he put his own interests ahead of Mom's clear wishes. Alicia tapped her pen against the legal pad and said courts usually give wide authority to people with power of attorney, so we needed rock-solid evidence that he violated his duty on purpose. The notarized statement helped, but Father's lawyer would claim Mom changed her mind later, or that selling was better for the estate even if Mom disagreed. We had to prove Father knew exactly what Mom wanted and sold the house anyway, just to benefit himself and Diane. Alicia asked if I wanted to pursue this, knowing it would cost money, take months, maybe years, and destroy any remaining relationship with Father. I looked at the copies of Mom's letter spread across the table and told her the relationship was already destroyed the moment he sold that house. She nodded and said she had a partner who handled these exact cases. Lorraine Morris specialized in probate disputes where family members abused power of attorney or stole inheritances. Alicia called Lorraine's extension and explained the situation while I sat there feeling my heart pound. Lorraine said she could meet us tomorrow morning at 9 to go over strategy. I left Alicia's office with a stack of paperwork to review and a sick feeling in my stomach about what came next. The next morning, I drove back downtown and met both lawyers in the same conference room. Lorraine was younger than Alicia, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that looked sharp and focused. She had already reviewed all the documents Alicia sent her and started talking through our options before I even sat down. Our strongest approach was demanding the sale be reversed completely, or forcing Father to pay me the full $400,000 plus extra money for emotional pain and all the legal costs. She said this kind of lawsuit would take everything that was left between me and Father and burn it to the ground. There would be no going back, no family dinners, no pretending things were okay. I told her that relationship died when he sold my mother's house and spent the money on a condo with his mistress. Lorraine looked at me for a long moment and then said good, because we needed that anger to get through what was coming. She explained Father's lawyer would try every trick to make me look bad, drag up anything from my past, question my relationship with Mom, suggest I was just greedy and dramatic. They would paint Father as a responsible man making hard choices about a difficult estate. We had to be ready to fight back with everything we had. Within the week, Lorraine filed the lawsuit at the county courthouse. The complaint listed breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets, and fraud. Reading the legal language felt surreal, seeing my family drama spelled out in formal terms with numbered paragraphs, and whereas statements, a process server delivered the papers to Father at his condo on a Thursday afternoon. My phone started ringing 53 minutes later with Father's number flashing on the screen. I stared at it vibrating on my kitchen counter and let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then Diane called from her phone. I turned the sound off and watched the missed call notifications stack up. The voicemail he left was 2 minutes of him screaming about how ungrateful and dramatic I was, how I was destroying the family over money, how Mom would be ashamed of me. I saved it and sent it to Lorraine. She called me that evening and said she was sending a formal letter to Father and his attorney. All communication had to go through the lawyers now. Any attempt to contact me directly would be documented as harassment and used against him in court. She asked if I felt safe and I said yes. Father was angry but not violent. She said to call her immediately if that changed. The letter went out the next morning by certified mail. Father tried calling twice more that weekend and then stopped. The silence felt worse somehow than the angry calls. 2 weeks later, Lorraine forwarded me a motion to dismiss filed by Father's new attorney, someone named Dashiell Cannon, who worked at a big firm downtown with glass walls and expensive art. The motion argued Father had complete legal authority through the power of attorney, and Mom's will wasn't specific enough about timing or conditions for the house transfer. It claimed I had no grounds to sue because Father acted within his legal rights as a state administrator. Dashiell's writing made Father sound reasonable and responsible, while making me sound like an entitled daughter who didn't understand how estates worked. Reading it made my face hot with anger. Lorraine and Alicia spent the next week preparing our response. They attached Mom's notarized statement showing her exact wishes, and the deed documentation proving the house was separate property that Father never owned. Their response brief laid out how Father violated his duty by selling property. He knew Mom wanted me to inherit and spending all the money on himself. They argued the power of attorney was supposed to protect Mom's interests, not give Father permission to steal from her estate. The judge reviewed both motions and denied the dismissal. The case would move forward with a hearing date set for 3 months out. And then 3 months felt like forever when I just wanted this resolved. Charlotte called 2 days after the judge's decision. We had been divorced for 4 years and kept things civil for the kids, but this was the first time we had talked about anything besides custody schedules in months. Charlotte had heard about the lawsuit from mutual friends and wanted to know how it affected our children. We talked for almost an hour, tense but not hostile. I explained I was trying to get back what Mom left me, and Charlotte said the kids had been asking questions about why they didn't see Grandpa anymore. We agreed to keep them out of the details as much as possible while being honest that grown-ups sometimes have serious disagreements. Charlotte offered to be flexible with the custody schedule if I needed time for legal appointments, and I felt grateful for that small kindness. The legal bills started arriving in my mailbox every 2 weeks. Alicia and Lorraine charged less than the big firms, but it was still $300 an hour for their time. The first month cost me $4,200. The second month was $3,800. I had maybe $6,000 in savings, and it was disappearing fast. I took out a loan against my car, using it as collateral for $15,000 at an interest rate that made me wince. At work, I asked for every extra shift available, covering for people on vacation and working doubles on weekends when the kids were with Charlotte. My body ached from the extra hours, but the paychecks helped cover the mounting costs. I started eating cheaper meals and canceling subscriptions I didn't need. Everything went toward keeping the lawyers working. Father's attorney sent discovery requests that landed in Lorraine's office like a bomb. They wanted copies of all my financial records for the past 5 years, every email or text message I exchanged with Mom before she died, details about my relationship with Father, including any arguments or conflicts, information about my divorce and custody arrangement, and my employment history. Lorraine said this was standard legal strategy to find anything they could use to make me look bad or discredit my claims. It felt invasive and ugly, like they were trying to dig through my entire life looking for dirt. I spent a weekend gathering bank statements and tax returns, and printing out old emails with Mom about ordinary things like recipes and garden tips. Reading her words again made me cry in a way I hadn't since finding the safety deposit box. She had been so careful to tell me she loved me and wanted me to have the house. Every message reinforced that Father knew exactly what he was stealing. Alicia and Lorraine prepared our own discovery requests that week, asking for every document related to the house sale, including the purchase agreement, closing statements, and title transfer records. We requested Father's bank statements showing where the $400,000 went, and copies of any emails or text messages between him and Diane about the property from the year before Mom died. Until now, the requests went out through certified mail, and Father's attorney had 30 days to respond. Lorraine said they'd probably fight it and try to limit what they had to turn over, but the judge would force them to produce the basic financial records at minimum. I felt a small surge of power knowing we were making Father account for his actions instead of just accepting what he'd done. 2 weeks later, Lorraine called saying Andre had found something interesting in the public property records. The sale had closed for $400,000 according to the buyer's documents and the title transfer, but Father had reported the sale price as $350,000 on some tax forms Andre found. Either Father was committing tax fraud by underreporting the sale price, or he'd hidden $50,000 somewhere that didn't show up in his financial disclosures. Andre kept digging through county records, mortgage databases, and property transaction histories, looking for where that money might have gone. He found something else that made my stomach turn. Father had taken out a home equity line of credit against Mom's house 6 months before she died, borrowing $50,000 that he never mentioned during the estate settlement. The loan documents showed Father as the borrower, even though the house was solely in Mom's name, which Andre said was possible if Father had power of attorney at the time. Mom probably never knew about the loan. She was in the middle of chemotherapy then, too sick to pay attention to financial paperwork. Father had used her illness and his power of attorney to steal from her while she was dying. I sat in Lorraine's office staring at the loan documents, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just about selling my inheritance anymore. Father had been systematically robbing Mom for months before her death, hiding debt against her property, and probably lying about where that borrowed money went. Lorraine explained this strengthened our case significantly because it showed a pattern of financial misconduct, not just one bad decision about selling the house. Father had been secretly borrowing against Mom's property, failing to disclose the debt during estate settlement, and now we could prove he'd potentially committed fraud in reporting the sale price. The next week, Valerie called me directly instead of going through the lawyers. She worked in the county records office and was married to Cullen from the bank. She said Father's attorney had requested copies of Mom's property records going back 20 years, which meant they were looking for anything to claim Father had an ownership interest in the house. Despite the deed showing otherwise, Valerie wasn't supposed to tip us off, but she'd met Mom a few times when Mom came to the bank with me, and she thought what Father did was wrong. I thanked her and immediately called Lorraine with the information. Lorraine filed an amended complaint within days, adding the undisclosed home equity loan and the potential tax fraud to our original claims. The new filing laid out everything Andre had found, including the discrepancy between the reported sale prices and the secret $50,000 loan Father took while Mom was sick. Father's attorney responded fast and angry. They filed motions calling our allegations defamatory and completely unsupported, demanding the judge sanction my lawyers for making false accusations without proper evidence. The motion claimed we were engaged in a harassment campaign designed to extort money from Father by making wild claims about tax fraud and hidden loans. It was all deflection and bluster, but it still made me nervous. The judge reviewed both sides' filings and denied the sanctions motion at a hearing I didn't have to attend. Lorraine called me after with good news and bad news. The good news was the judge found our allegations serious enough to warrant investigation and discovery. The bad news was the judge ordered us into mediation before the main hearing, saying both sides needed to try settling this without a full trial. The mediator assigned to our case was named Carmela Fisher, someone Lorraine said had a reputation for being firm but fair. I had my regular weekend visit with my kids that Friday. They asked why I seemed stressed and tired, noticing more than I wanted them to. I kept it vague, just saying I was dealing with some grown-up legal stuff about Grandma's house that was taking up a lot of my time and energy. They seemed satisfied with that answer and didn't push for details. We spent the weekend doing normal things like going to the park and making pancakes, and I tried to be present with them instead of obsessing over the case. When Charlotte came to pick them up Sunday evening, she pulled me aside while the kids gathered their stuff. She said if I needed more flexibility with the custody schedule for legal appointments or just to deal with everything, she was happy to work something out. It was a kind gesture that surprised me. Charlotte and I had our issues during the marriage, but we'd managed to become decent co-parents after the divorce, and this reminder of why we worked better apart than together felt oddly comforting. The first mediation session happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room at Carmela's office downtown. Father and Diane sat on one side of the long table with their attorney. I sat on the other side with Alicia and Lorraine flanking me like protective guards. Carmela sat at the head of the table, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone carefully. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Father wouldn't look at me directly. Diane kept her face blank, but her hands fidgeted with her phone. Their attorney shuffled papers and whispered to Father occasionally. My lawyers had their own stack of documents ready, including all the evidence Andre had found about the hidden loan and the sale price discrepancy. Carmela started by explaining the mediation process and ground rules, but I barely heard her. I was too focused on Father sitting across from me, the man who'd stolen Mom's house and apparently stolen from Mom while she was dying. This was the first time I'd been in the same room with him since that confrontation at his condo, and the anger I felt was so strong I could taste it. Carmela started with opening statements about finding common ground and working toward resolution that both sides could accept. Father's attorney Dashiell cleared his throat and pulled out a folder. He said his client was willing to make a good faith offer to settle this matter quickly and avoid costly litigation. Father sat up straighter, like he was doing me some kind of favor. Dashiell slid a paper across the table showing $75,000 as the settlement amount. He said this was generous considering I had no legal entitlement to the property, and Father had acted within his authority as power of attorney. The number hit me like a slap. $75,000 from a $400,000 house, less than 20% of what Mom wanted me to have. I looked at Lorraine and shook my head before Dashiell even finished talking. I said no, absolutely not. That offer was insulting and we wouldn't even consider it. Father's face got red and he started to say something, but Dashiell put a hand on his arm to stop him. Alicia opened our folder and slid our counteroffer across the table. $400,000 for the full value of the house plus $50,000 in damages and legal fees. Total of $450,000. Dashiell laughed. Actually laughed out loud. He said that was completely outrageous and showed we weren't negotiating in good faith. He said if we insisted on unreasonable demands, his client was prepared to fight this through years of appeals and drag it out until I gave up or ran out of money for lawyers. Lorraine stayed calm and said our demand was based on the actual value of the property that was wrongfully sold, plus compensation for the emotional harm and legal costs Father's actions caused. She said we had documentation of everything and were confident a judge would see it our way. The room got tense and quiet. Diane was typing on her phone like she wasn't even paying attention. Father kept shifting in his chair and wouldn't look at me. Carmela suggested we take a 15-minute break to let both sides think about possible compromise positions. She said sometimes stepping away helped people see solutions they couldn't see in the heat of the moment. Everyone stood up and I headed for the hallway to get some air and clear my head. Alicia went to make a phone call and Lorraine stayed in the conference room reviewing papers. I was standing by the window looking out at the street below when I heard footsteps behind me. Diane appeared next to me with her arms crossed. She said I was being selfish and destroying Father's happiness over money. She said he'd worked hard his whole life and deserved to enjoy his retirement without his daughter dragging him through court and making him look like a criminal. The nerve of her saying this to me, the woman who slept with my mother's husband while Mom was dying, was unreal. She kept going, saying I should think about what this stress was doing to Father's health and whether some old house was really worth tearing the family apart. I turned to face her directly and said she destroyed my mother's happiness by sleeping with her husband, so she had no right to lecture me about anything. I said she was a cheater and a home wrecker and she didn't get to play victim now that there were consequences. Diane's face went pale and then red. She said I didn't know what I was talking about and my parents' marriage was already over before she came into the picture. I said that was a lie. Mom told me everything before she died, including when the affair started. Diane stepped closer like she was going to say something else, but I felt a hand on my arm. Alicia had come back and was pulling me away from Diane. She said quietly that I needed to stop talking before I said something that could hurt our case in court. She guided me back toward the conference room while Diane stood there looking mad and shaken. Alicia whispered that I was right about everything, but we couldn't let emotions give their side ammunition to use against us. We went back into the mediation room and everyone took their seats again. Carmela asked if anyone had new positions to discuss after the break. Dashiell said his client's offer stood at $75,000, and that was final. Lorraine said our position remained at $450,000 based on the evidence we had. Carmela tried for another 20 minutes to find middle ground, but neither side would budge. Father sat there stone-faced the whole time, and Diane kept glaring at me from across the table. Finally, Carmela said she was disappointed we couldn't reach an agreement today, but she was scheduling another mediation session in 3 weeks to try again. She said both sides should use that time to really think about what they wanted and whether going to trial was worth the cost and stress. After we left the building and got to the parking lot, Lorraine said she honestly didn't expect father to budge much unless we found more leverage, or he got scared about the fraud implications Andre discovered. She said 3 weeks would give us time to dig deeper and maybe find something that would make him more willing to settle fairly. Back at my apartment that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the mediation and how father just sat there acting like he'd done nothing wrong. I pulled out the box of photos I'd saved from Mom's house before everything got donated or thrown away. Pictures of Sunday dinners around the big dining room table, Mom in her garden wearing her sun hat and gloves, the bedroom upstairs that she'd started fixing up for my kids to use when they visited. She'd painted it yellow and bought a bunk bed. So excited about having them stay over more. That room was supposed to be theirs, a place where they could keep toys and clothes and feel like they had a space at their grandmother's house. Now some strangers' kids were sleeping in that room, and Mom's garden was probably torn up and replaced with something else. The grief hit me fresh and hard, like it had just happened instead of 2 years ago. I sat on my floor surrounded by photos and cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Not angry crying, just sad, missing Mom, and missing the life she'd planned for us that father stole. My kids called at 8 for our regular Tuesday video chat. They were at their other parents' place, happy and talking over each other about their day at the school. My daughter showed me a drawing she'd made in art class. My son told me about scoring a goal in soccer practice. They asked what I'd done today, and I said I had some meetings for work, keeping it vague. Their faces on the screen, so normal and sweet and untouched by all this legal mess, reminded me why I was fighting. Not just for the money, though that mattered, but because Mom had wanted them to have something from her. She'd wanted them to inherit her house someday, to have that connection to her even after she was gone. She'd told me that specifically in one of her last conversations, saying the house should stay in the family and go to them eventually. Father took that away from them, just like he took it from me. After we hung up, I felt more sure about pushing forward with the lawsuit no matter how long it took or how ugly it got. Andre called Wednesday morning while I was getting ready for work. He said he'd tracked down more information about that $50,000 home equity loan father took out on Mom's house. The loan was approved 6 months before Mom died, right after her cancer diagnosis. Andre found credit card statements showing father and Diane took a trip to Europe that summer, staying in expensive hotels and eating at fancy restaurants. The dates matched up with Mom's first round of chemotherapy. While Mom was sick and scared and going through treatment that made her weak and nauseous, father was in Paris and Rome with his mistress spending money he'd borrowed against Mom's house. The timing made it even more disgusting than I'd thought. Andre said he had receipts and bank records proving the $50,000 was spent almost entirely on that trip and other luxury purchases for Diane. None of it went toward Mom's medical bills or house expenses like father probably claimed when he took out the loan. Andre had more. He'd been going through old bank statements I'd gotten from the estate account during discovery. He found that father opened a joint checking account with Diane just 2 months before Mom died. The account was at a different bank than the family accounts, like he was trying to hide it. Then 3 weeks before Mom passed away, father transferred $30,000 from the estate account into this secret joint account with Diane. $30,000 was supposed to pay for Mom's final medical bills and funeral expenses. Instead, father moved it into an account with his girlfriend while Mom was in hospice dying. The bank records showed Diane making withdrawals and purchases from that account while Mom was still alive. She was spending Mom's money before Mom was even gone. I felt sick reading through the documents Andre sent over. This wasn't just about the house anymore. Father had been stealing from Mom and the estate for years, hiding money and spending it on Diane while pretending to take care of Mom's affairs. I forwarded everything to Lorraine and she called me back within an hour. She said these discoveries were serious and could push this into criminal territory if the prosecutor's office wanted to pursue elder abuse or financial exploitation charges. Taking out loans against a dying person's property and moving estate money into secret accounts with a romantic partner was exactly the kind of thing that got people criminally charged, not just sued. She asked if I wanted to report it to the authorities, and I said yes without even thinking about it. Father deserved to face real consequences, not just pay money back. Lorraine said she'd help me file reports with the County Adult Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office, and we could use the criminal investigation as leverage in our civil case too. She warned me that father would probably react badly when he found out, maybe even dangerously, and I should be prepared for things to get worse before they got better. I told her I was ready for whatever came next, because Mom deserved justice, and I wasn't backing down now. The next morning, I went to the County Adult Protective Services office downtown and filled out a complaint form about father's handling of mother's estate. The woman who took my report looked tired and had stacks of files on her desk that reached halfway to the ceiling. She explained they would review the evidence and interview father if needed, but warned me criminal charges were much harder to prove than civil cases and took way longer to process. I gave her copies of everything Andre found about the secret bank account and the loan father took out while mother was sick. She wrote notes and said someone would contact me in a few weeks after they looked into it. From there, I drove to the district attorney's office and filed another report about possible elder financial abuse. The prosecutor who met with me seemed more interested than the woman at Protective Services, but he also warned me not to expect quick results. He said most of these cases took months or even years to investigate, and many never led to criminal charges at all because proving intent was so difficult. Still, I felt better knowing both reports were filed, and Father would have to answer questions about what he did. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Father's number. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me hit play. His voice came through the speaker, shaking and strange. He said I was trying to destroy him and Diane over a simple misunderstanding about estate management. He said the criminal complaints were going too far, and I needed to drop them before I regretted it. Then his voice changed and got softer, almost begging. He said we could work this out as a family if I would just be reasonable and stop attacking him through lawyers and government agencies. He said Mother wouldn't want me tearing the family apart like this. The voicemail ended with him saying I had 1 week to withdraw the complaints, or he would have no choice but to protect himself. I played it 3 times trying to figure out if that last part was a threat, or just Father being dramatic like always. I forwarded the voicemail to Lorraine and she called back within an hour sounding more serious than I'd ever heard her. She said the message was clearly threatening and combined with everything else gave us grounds for a restraining order. We filed the paperwork that afternoon and a judge approved it the next day. The order said Father couldn't contact me directly through phone calls, texts, emails, or any other method. He also couldn't come within 500 feet of my apartment or my workplace. If he violated the order even once, he could be arrested. A deputy served the restraining order papers to Father at his condo, and according to the deputy's report, Father turned red and started yelling about how I was being ridiculous. Diane apparently tried to calm him down, but he just kept ranting about ungrateful daughters and legal harassment. I felt a weird mix of satisfaction and sadness, knowing my own father now had a legal order keeping him away from me. 2 weeks passed before the second mediation session with Carmela. I walked into her office and found Father already sitting there with Diane and Dashiell. Father looked older somehow, like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. Diane sat next to him wearing too much jewelry and an expression like she'd rather be anywhere else. Carmela started by asking if we'd all had time to think about reasonable settlement positions. Dashiell spoke up first and said Father's position had shifted after reviewing all the evidence and considering the potential costs of going to trial. He said Father was now willing to offer $200,000 to settle everything and make this go away. It was half the house value, but way more than the insulting $75,000 from the first mediation. Carmela looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. Lorraine squeezed my arm gently like a warning to think carefully before speaking. Back in Lorraine's office after the mediation, I told her there was no way I was accepting that offer. $200,000 meant Father would keep half the money from a house he never owned or paid for. Half the money from Mother's house that she specifically left to me. I said it felt like rewarding him for stealing and I couldn't do it. Lorraine explained that $200,000 was actually a realistic settlement amount given the costs of going to trial and the uncertainty of what a judge might decide. She said we had a strong case but nothing was guaranteed, and trials were expensive and emotionally draining. I understood what she was saying, but the fury in my chest wouldn't let me accept it. Father didn't deserve to keep even $1 of that money, much less $200,000. I told Lorraine to tell Dashiell we were rejecting the offer and moving forward with the hearing. The hearing date was set for 6 weeks out, and Lorraine warned me about what to expect. She said the judge would review all our evidence and Father's defense, and then decide whether to order the sale reversed or award me damages or something else entirely. The problem was, judges almost never reversed completed real estate sales, because it affected innocent third-party buyers who had nothing to do with the family dispute. The couple who bought Mother's house didn't know about any of this, and forcing them to give up their home seemed unfair even to me. So most likely the judge would order Father to pay me some amount of money as damages, but probably not the full $400,000. Lorraine said we needed to be prepared for a number somewhere between what we wanted and what Father was offering. I hated the idea of compromise, but I also knew Lorraine was being realistic about how courts actually worked. A week before we were supposed to appear in court, Dashiell contacted Lorraine with a new offer. Father would pay $300,000 plus cover all my legal fees, which came to about $34,000 so far. The total would be $340,000, which was more than half the house value, but still not the full amount Mother wanted me to have. The catch was, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising never to talk publicly about what Father did, and I had to withdraw the criminal complaints with Adult Protective Services and the district attorney's office. Dashiell said this was Father's final offer, and if I didn't accept it, we would see each other in court and let the judge decide. Lorraine said she needed to discuss it with me before responding, and we scheduled a meeting for the next morning with Alicia too. I sat with Alicia and Lorraine in their conference room for over 3 hours, going through every possible outcome. They explained that $340,000 total was probably the best offer I would get, and maybe even better than what a judge might award. Going to trial meant risking that the judge would side with Father on the power of attorney authority, and I could end up with less money or possibly nothing at all. Trials were also expensive and stressful, and could take months or years if Father appealed the decision. They weren't pressuring me either way, but they wanted me to understand the real risks of turning down this offer. Alicia said in her experience, judges often split the difference in cases like this, and I might end up with $250,000 or less after a trial. The $340,000 offer was actually pretty good considering all the uncertainty. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about what Mother would want me to do. She wanted me to have the house and its value that was clear from her letter and her will, but she also wanted me to take care of myself and my kids and have a stable life. Fighting this all the way to a trial and possibly appeals might be about principle, but it was costing me money I didn't have and time I couldn't get back. It was causing me stress that affected my work and my time with my children. Mother was practical about things like this. She would want me to get as much as I could, but also to know when to accept a win, even if it wasn't a perfect win. $340,000 was real money that could change my life and my kids' lives. It wasn't the full $400,000, but it was close, and it came with my legal fees covered too. The next morning, I called Lorraine and told her I would accept the settlement with one change. I refused to sign the non-disclosure agreement because I wouldn't be silenced about what Father did to Mother, and to me, people should know what kind of person he was, and I wasn't going to protect his reputation as part of the deal. Lorraine said she would push back on that requirement and see if Dashiell would agree to drop it. After 2 days of back and forth, Dashiell surprisingly agreed to remove the non-disclosure agreement from the settlement terms. Maybe Father realized that trying to silence me would just make him look worse, or maybe he was just tired of fighting. Either way, I got the money without having to promise to keep quiet about his betrayal. We signed the settlement papers 2 days later in Carmela's office downtown. Father sat across from me in a gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and wouldn't make eye contact once during the whole thing. Diane sat beside him in a black dress like she was attending a funeral, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue every few minutes even though she wasn't actually crying. I watched her do it 3 times while Carmela explained the terms we'd already agreed to, and realized she was performing for someone. Maybe herself. Maybe trying to look like the wronged party. Somehow Carmela walked through each page of the settlement, pointing to signature lines and initials required in the margins. Father signed first, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote his name. I signed after him, my handwriting steady and clear. Diane signed as a witness even though she didn't need to, probably wanting her name on the document that proved she'd won something. Carmela collected the papers and said the funds would transfer within 5 business days. I stood up without saying anything to either of them and walked out. The elevator ride down felt longer than the whole meeting. The money hit my account 6 days later, not 5, but close enough. I checked my banking app 3 times that morning before it finally showed up as a wire transfer for $340,000, the largest number I'd ever seen attached to my name. It wasn't the $400,000 Mother wanted me to have, but it was real money that came from forcing Father to face what he'd done. I sat in my car outside the bank staring at the number on my phone screen. Part of me wanted to feel happy or relieved, but mostly I just felt tired. This money represented 2 years of grief and 6 months of fighting, and the permanent end of whatever relationship I'd had with my father. I withdrew $200 in cash just to hold physical money in my hands and make it feel real, then deposited it right back because I didn't know what else to do with it. The prosecutor called me that afternoon about withdrawing the criminal complaint. She sounded disappointed when I explained the settlement required me to drop it. She said her office could still pursue charges independently if they wanted, since elder financial abuse was a crime against the state, not just against me. I told her I understood, but doubted they would without my cooperation and testimony. She agreed that was probably true, then said she hoped Father at least learned something from being investigated and having to pay back what he took. I thanked her for taking my complaint seriously, and hung up. Later, I got a letter from Adult Protective Services saying they were closing my case due to the civil settlement, but the report would stay on file if anyone else ever filed against Father. At least there was a record now. Charlotte met me at a coffee shop the next week to talk about the kids' future. We sat outside even though it was cold because Charlotte didn't want to risk anyone overhearing financial discussions. I explained I wanted to set up trust funds for both kids, $75,000 each, so they'd have money for college or whatever they needed when they were older. Charlotte's eyes got wide when I said the amount. We spent an hour on Charlotte's laptop researching different types of accounts and investment options. Charlotte knew more about this stuff than I did from working in finance before the kids were born. We decided on custodial accounts that would transfer to the kids when they turned 21. Invested in index funds that Charlotte said were safe and would grow over time. Mother would have loved knowing her grandchildren would have this security. Charlotte helped me set up the accounts that same day at the bank, and I transferred the money while sitting at a desk with a financial advisor who kept congratulating me like I'd won the lottery instead of fought for what was already mine. I started looking at houses the following weekend. My apartment lease was up in 2 months anyway, and I was tired of living in a place that felt temporary. I wanted something small but permanent. A place the kids could call home when they visited instead of just Mom's apartment. The real estate agent showed me 6 properties in my price range before I found one that felt right. 3 bedrooms, older construction but well-maintained, with a backyard that got good sun. The kitchen was outdated and the bathroom needed work, but the bones were solid. I put in an offer that same day for $175,000, lower than asking because the place needed updates. The seller countered at 180, and I accepted. The whole process took 3 weeks with inspections and paperwork, and the mortgage company asking for endless documentation. I put down $60,000 cash and took out a small mortgage for the rest, keeping plenty in savings for emergencies and repairs. The day I got the keys, I sat in the empty living room for an hour just breathing and thinking about how this was mine, really mine, in a way Mother's house never got to be. The backyard was mostly dirt and weeds when I moved in. I spent my first weekend there clearing space for a garden, pulling up dead grass and turning soil. I bought flowers from the nursery that Mother used to grow in her garden, purple irises and yellow daylilies and pink roses that would bloom in summer. I planted them carefully in neat rows, remembering how Mother showed me to dig holes twice as wide as the root ball and mix in compost. My hands got dirty and my back hurt, but it felt good to be building something. The kids came over while I was planting and helped me dig holes and pour water. They asked if this was like Grandma's old garden, and I said yes, exactly like that. We planted a small vegetable patch too with tomatoes and peppers, things the kids could watch grow and pick when they visited. Alicia and Lorraine sent their final bill 2 weeks after closing. I opened the envelope expecting a huge number after 6 months of legal work, but it was actually less than I'd budgeted. The letter explained they'd reduced their hourly rate by 30% for the last 2 months because they knew how hard I'd fought and wanted to help. The total came to $18,000 instead of the $25,000 I'd expected. I wrote them a check that same day and included a thank you card I bought at the drugstore. I spent 20 minutes trying to write something that expressed how grateful I was that they'd taken my case and treated me like a person instead of just a client. I settled on thanking them for believing me and fighting for what was right. I dropped it in the mail on my way to work and hoped they understood what they'd meant to me during the hardest months of my life. Father tried to contact me about a month after the settlement through a mutual family friend named Carol, who'd known both my parents for years. Carol called me sounding uncomfortable and said Father had asked her to reach out. He wanted to know if we could talk about rebuilding our relationship, maybe meet for coffee or lunch. Carol said he seemed genuinely sorry about how things had gone. I told Carol there was nothing to rebuild, and Father should focus on the life he chose with Diane. Carol pushed back gently, saying family was important and maybe I'd regret not trying. I explained that Father had stolen from me, betrayed Mother's memory, and shown me exactly who he was when it mattered. That wasn't family, that was just biology. Carol said she understood and wouldn't bring it up again. I thanked her for being kind about it, and we hung up. Father never tried to contact me directly after that. The kids visited their first full weekend at the new house 6 weeks after I moved in. They ran through every room picking out which bedroom they wanted and arguing over who got the one with the bigger closet. At dinner, they asked if they could stay extra weekends sometimes, not just every other one. I looked at them across the table in our kitchen and felt something loosen in my chest. I called Charlotte that night and we worked out a more flexible schedule where the kids could stay with me 3 weekends a month instead of 2 if they wanted. Charlotte said the kids had been asking to spend more time with me and this seemed like good timing. I knew Mother had somehow made this possible, that the house and the stability came from her fighting to leave me something even when Father tried to take it away. The kids loved having their own rooms and a yard to play in. They invited friends over and did homework at the kitchen table and helped me water the garden. Every Sunday I framed one of Mother's letters from the safety deposit box and hung it in my bedroom where I'd see it every morning when I woke up. The letter was dated 2 months before she died, written in her shaky handwriting on lined paper. She wrote about being strong and fighting for what was right even when it was hard. She said she knew I had it in me to stand up for myself, and she was proud of me in advance for whatever battles I'd have to face. Reading those words every day reminded me I'd done what she asked. The path had been harder than I'd imagined back when I stood in her driveway finding out the house was sold, but I'd fought and won enough to build a different life, one where my kids had security and I had a home, and Mother's memory was honored. 6 months after signing the settlement, I took inventory of where I was. I had a house I owned with a small mortgage I could afford. I had money in the bank and trust funds set up for my kids' futures. My children were happy and thriving and spending more time with me. My job was stable, and I'd learned I could handle legal battles and difficult decisions I never thought I'd face. The relationship with Father was over, but I'd made peace with that. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, and I was okay choosing my own happiness and my children's future over pretending everything was fine. Mother would have been proud of the life I'd built from the pieces of what she left me. It wasn't the inheritance she'd planned, but it was something solid and real and mine. Andre emailed me his final report 8 months after the settlement closed, and I opened it during my lunch break at work. The attachment contained financial records, showing Father and Diane took out a mortgage on their luxury condo just 3 weeks after paying me, borrowing $200,000 against the property they'd bought with Mother's house money. Their monthly payment was steep, over $3,000 a month, and Andre's notes indicated they were already late on 2 payments according to county records. The marble counters and floor-to-ceiling windows weren't as secure as they'd pretended during all those legal meetings. I felt a small satisfaction knowing their lifestyle required debt they might not be able to maintain, that the consequences of stealing from me were following them into their supposedly perfect new life. I forwarded the report to Alicia and Lorraine with a short thank you message and archived it in a folder I rarely opened anymore. A month later, I saw a flyer at the courthouse while handling some paperwork for work about a local organization that helped families navigate estate disputes and elder financial abuse. The meeting was Tuesday nights at a community center downtown, and I showed up the next week not sure what to expect. 12 people sat in a circle sharing stories that sounded frighteningly similar to mine. Children whose parents stole inheritances, siblings who manipulated elderly relatives, family members who abused power of attorney for personal gain. The facilitator asked if I wanted to share, and I told them the basics about Mother's house and the legal battle and the settlement. Afterward, 3 people came up asking questions about my lawyers and how I'd gathered evidence and whether the safety deposit box discovery made the difference. I started attending regularly, and eventually the facilitator asked if I'd be willing to mentor people just starting their fights. My experience became useful in ways I hadn't expected, helping others understand what documents to request and which lawyers specialized in probate disputes and how to protect themselves during the process. One woman reminded me of myself 6 months earlier, shaking and crying while describing how her brother sold their mother's jewelry collection worth $50,000 and claimed it was his right as executor. I walked her through the steps I'd taken and gave her Alicia's contact information and followed up the next week to see how her consultation went. The 2-year anniversary of finalizing the settlement fell on a Sunday, and I picked up my kids Saturday morning for the weekend. We drove to the cemetery after lunch, and I'd brought flowers from my garden, the same varieties Mother used to grow in her yard. My daughter carried the small shovel, and my son held the watering can as we walked to Mother's headstone in the older section under oak trees. We planted purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans around the base while I told them about their grandmother's strength. I explained how she'd fought cancer but also fought to make sure we'd be taken care of, how she'd prepared evidence and written letters knowing Father might try to take what was ours. My daughter asked if that's why we had our house now, and I said yes. Grandmother made it possible even after she was gone. My son wanted to know if he could plant flowers at our house like these, and I promised we'd start a special garden section, just for remembering grandmother life had settled into a good rhythm by then. I owned my house with a mortgage I could handle on my salary, and the kids' trust funds were growing with conservative investments Charlotte and I monitored together. My children spent 3 weekends a month with me now and brought friends over regularly, and did homework at the kitchen table while I cooked dinner. My job remained stable, and I'd gotten a small raise that helped with the bills. The relationship with Father was permanently broken, and I'd made peace with that reality. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, and I was okay choosing my own happiness and my children's future over pretending everything was fine. Mother would have been proud of the life I'd built from the pieces of what she left me, not the inheritance she'd planned, but something solid and real that belonged to us.